Long Island's most notorious murderers is staying behind bars.
And News 12 Long Island's Doug Geed has a story you'll see only on 12.
I need all the people I can get. I need everybody out there.
It was like a real-life soap opera that riveted Long Islanders during the final week of 1987. For days, News 12 Long Island followed Matthew Solomon as he organized search parties to look for his wife, Lisa.
He's standing in front of a television camera, eyes red, voice cracking. A newlywed husband, hands trembling, begging strangers for help. "Please," he says, fighting back tears. "Just bring her home." The image is hard to forget. A man in visible pain, pleading for his wife's safe return. The kind of moment that pulls at your chest before your mind can catch up. Viewers across Long Island watched him and believed him. Many still do. But here's the question no one was asking yet. What if the man begging for his wife's safe return already knew she wasn't coming back? Those tears aired on television while the clock kept moving somewhere else, quietly, steadily, in a direction no one could see yet. Publicly, Matthew Solomon was everywhere. On the news, leading searches, speaking for his missing wife. Privately, there was a timeline unfolding that didn't quite line up with the grief the cameras captured. Something about those tears felt off. Not because grief has rules, but because certain details refused to sit still once you noticed them. The timing, the certainty, the way Matthew seemed to take control of the story while insisting he had none. Lisa Solomon didn't vanish in the middle of the day. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take what she needed. She stepped out briefly, or so it was said, and never came back. And somehow, the man who should have been the most lost without her appeared remarkably visible at every turn. Before we go any further, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles, and let us know where you're watching from around the world. This case pulled an entire community into its grip, and I want to know how far its echo still reaches today. Because the deeper people looked, the harder it became to ignore the contrast. The husband the public saw, and the husband investigators would later have to examine. At first, suspicion didn't come knocking loudly. It waited, it watched, and it arrived only after something terrible was found. Something that forced everyone to ask whether those tears on TV were grief or a performance hiding the truth. And once that question surfaced, nothing about this story looked the same again. Before Lisa Weaver became the center of a search, a headline, or a question mark, she was simply a young woman surrounded by family. Careful by nature, gentle in spirit, and deeply attached to the people she loved. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't impulsive. Even as a child, she preferred familiarity to risk, closeness to independence. She stayed near her sister, chose her friends thoughtfully, and carried herself with a quiet steadiness that made her parents feel safe watching her grow up. Her bond with her mother ran especially deep. They talked often, shared routines, and leaned on each other during difficult moments. And there were many. When Lisa was still a teenager, her father became seriously ill. Cancer entered the family slowly, then refused to leave. Long hospital visits replaced normal evenings. Strength was required early, and Lisa learned it before most people her age had to. She worried deeply about her father, sometimes more than she let on, and that concern followed her into adulthood. During one summer afternoon in town, Lisa met Matthew Solomon. He was confident, quick with jokes, and knew how to command attention without raising his voice. He worked at a local gas station at the time, but he spoke about the future with certainty. He didn't hesitate when he wanted something, and from the moment he noticed Lisa, it was clear he wanted her. Matthew made her laugh. He made her feel chosen. When Lisa went home that day, she talked about him with excitement, not just about how he looked, but how he made her feel seen. For someone who had spent years worrying about her family, the attention felt comforting, reassuring. When Matthew met Lisa's family, the first impressions were positive. He was friendly, engaging, and eager to fit in. He showed up, he stayed close, he wanted to be part of everything. To some, it looked like devotion. To others, it was simply enthusiasm. Lisa took it as proof that she mattered. They dated for years, breaking up and reconnecting more than once, but always finding their way back to each other. Matthew presented stability, a steady job, nice clothes, the promise of security. Lisa liked that. She liked the idea of building something solid, something safe. On Christmas Day, exactly 1 year before she would disappear, Matthew proposed. The ring was striking. The moment was public. Lisa said yes without hesitation. She threw herself into planning the wedding, determined to create something beautiful. When she finally walked down the aisle, she looked radiant, small, glowing, hopeful. Her family watched with pride, believing they were witnessing the beginning of a happy life. But woven quietly into that happiness was a pattern few questioned at the time. Matthew's constant need to be noticed, to be central, to be indispensable. It didn't feel threatening. It felt like love. And that's the danger. Sometimes the most dangerous relationships don't begin with fear. They begin with devotion. Christmas Eve was supposed to mark a beginning. For Lisa Solomon, it was her first holiday season as a newlywed. The first time traditions would shift, the first time she would balance the family she came from with the one she had just created. She talked about it with excitement earlier that day, sharing how much it meant to spend the evening with her husband, to build something that was finally theirs. According to Matthew, the night began quietly. They stayed home, celebrating their 2-month anniversary with a romantic dinner. He later described lobster, champagne, familiar comforts, familiar routines. After dinner, they settled into the living room. Lisa put on her favorite television show, one she recorded every day without fail. Matthew said he stretched out, relaxed, and drifted off. But sometime close to 11:30 p.m., Matthew claimed Lisa woke him. She was upset, he said, emotional. Her father's health weighed heavily on her, especially on a night built around family. She needed air. She needed space. Just a short walk to clear her head. Matthew told investigators he warned her not to go far. Stay close, he said. Just around the block. She promised she would. 10 minutes, she told him. Then, she would be back. Lisa changed clothes. Sweatpants, a sweatshirt, old running sneakers. She didn't grab a purse. She didn't take identification. She didn't take her car keys. She didn't take her medication, despite having asthma. There was no coat, no gloves, and the temperature outside was unforgiving. Still, according to Matthew, she stepped out. And then, nothing. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Matthew said he waited. Eventually, he grew concerned and went looking for her. Driving through nearby streets, he stopped an officer, asking if a woman had been seen walking alone. The answer was no, at least not Lisa. By early morning, concern turned into alarm. At 6 a.m., Matthew called 911. Shortly after, he called Lisa's mother. The question echoed immediately. Why would Lisa leave like that? This wasn't her pattern. She was cautious. She didn't wander late at night. She didn't leave home without what she needed, especially not medical supplies. She didn't disappear without telling someone where she was going. And yet, on this one night, she walked out with nothing but the clothes she wore. The timing raised quiet questions. Why Christmas Eve? Why after celebrating together? Why alone? Matthew's account placed her outside for no more than 10 minutes. But 10 minutes became an hour, then several, then an entire night. As daylight crept in, neighbors gathered, family rushed over. Police began asking the same questions everyone else was thinking, not out loud yet, but insistently. Why leave so unprepared? Why by herself? Why now? Lisa Solomon never came back through that door, and according to everything we know, that walk into the night would be the last moment anyone ever saw her alive. By the time most people were waking up on Christmas morning, Matthew Solomon was already telling the story of a missing wife. At 6 a.m., he dialed 911, reporting that Lisa had gone for a short walk the night before and never returned. The call set everything in motion. Patrol cars, questions, and a sense that something was very wrong far earlier than anyone wanted to admit. Not long after, Matthew called Lisa's mother. The words didn't land gently. A husband saying he couldn't find his wife. A mother trying to understand how a young woman could vanish overnight. Confusion turned to panic in seconds. Family members rushed over. Neighbors began to gather. What should have been a quiet holiday morning became crowded and tense. Because of the bitter weather, police didn't wait. They began asking questions immediately. Family, friends, co-workers. Flyers were made quickly, copied, and handed out. Lisa's photos spread fast. By the end of the day, her face was already appearing on local television. And Matthew was there. He spoke to officers, he spoke to reporters, he spoke to volunteers who arrived ready to help. On camera, he looked shaken, his voice strained as he asked strangers to keep their eyes open, to bring his wife home. The pleas were emotional, direct, hard to ignore. "Please," he said, "if anyone knows anything." Those clips played again and again. At the same time, Matthew wasn't standing back. He stepped forward. He helped organize search teams. He suggested areas to check. He moved through the neighborhood with purpose, telling people where to go and what to look for. He didn't fade into the background the way some spouses do when fear overwhelms them. He took charge. As the day wore on, volunteers followed his lead into rougher sections nearby, places known for trouble, places Lisa herself would have avoided. At one point, Matthew even carried a shotgun as he moved through those streets, saying he was ready to protect anyone who came across danger. To many watching, it looked like devotion under pressure. A husband refusing to sit still while his wife was missing, a man doing everything he could. But not everyone felt reassured. Some noticed how composed he seemed between bursts of emotion, how quickly he shifted from tears to instruction, how naturally he assumed control over the search itself. These weren't accusations, just impressions that lingered quietly beneath the surface while sympathy still ruled the moment. On television, Matthew's face told one story. In person, his actions suggested another, focused, directive, certain about where attention should go. And as the search expanded, so did the question no one wanted to voice yet. Was this panic born from fear or something closer to control? At that point, the community still believed Lisa would be found alive. But with every hour, Matthew remained at the center of the effort. The contrast between what people saw on screen and what they witnessed off-camera became harder to ignore. And that contrast would matter more than anyone realized. Very soon. Because of the freezing weather and the circumstances surrounding Lisa's disappearance, police didn't wait the usual amount of time before treating the situation as urgent. Officers moved quickly, checking hospitals, calling relatives, and tracing every place she might reasonably have gone. The expectation, at least in the beginning, was that she would be found alive, cold but safe, perhaps confused or disoriented. That hope fueled everything that followed. Flyers were printed almost immediately. Lisa's face appeared on telephone poles, storefront windows, and car windshields. Volunteers carried stacks of them through neighborhoods, knocking on doors and asking strangers the same question over and over. "Have you seen her?" Local news stations repeated her image throughout the day, and tips began pouring in. At first, every phone call brought a surge of belief. Someone thought they'd seen a woman matching Lisa's description walking along a road. Another caller was sure she'd been spotted at a store. Each report sent officers racing out, families holding their breath, only to be met with the same answer again and again. It wasn't her. Some tips came from people convinced they could help in other ways. Calls from psychics flooded in, each claiming insight into where Lisa might be. Search teams followed up on those claims too, combing areas suggested by strangers who had never met her. Nothing came of it. The same pattern repeated, hope rising, then collapsing under the weight of reality. As days passed, exhaustion set in. Volunteers kept searching despite the cold, despite the growing fear that time was slipping away. Lisa's family lived on adrenaline and disbelief, moving from one possible break to the next, refusing to stop because stopping felt like surrender. One lead did stand out long enough to draw serious attention. Investigators learned about a man from Lisa's workplace, someone known as Rob, who had shown interest in her while she was married. Detectives tracked him down and questioned him thoroughly. For a moment, it felt like the puzzle might finally have a piece that fit. But it didn't. Rob was able to account for his whereabouts during the night. Lisa disappeared. His story checked out. He was cleared. Once again, the path went cold. By then, the case had reached a painful rhythm. Each new possibility carried the same arc: anticipation, urgency, and then disappointment. For Lisa's family, the emotional toll was crushing. For investigators, the lack of direction became its own warning sign. People do not simply vanish without leaving something behind, and as the list of outside possibilities shrank, the focus inevitably narrowed. At this point in the story, who do you suspect? A stranger or someone closer? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because with every dead end, the search wasn't just about finding Lisa anymore. It was about understanding who had last seen her, and why every other explanation was falling apart. 6 days had passed since Lisa Solomon stepped out of her home and disappeared. By then, many volunteers had been forced to stop searching. The cold had taken its toll. Work, family obligations, and exhaustion pulled people away one by one. But a few remained, not because they had new information, but because they couldn't accept the idea of leaving her out there alone. Among them was Lisa's cousin, Stephen. Late that night, Stephen joined an off-duty auxiliary police officer who knew the area well. They decided to check a stretch of farmland not far from where Lisa lived. Wide, open fields most people had already written off. It was quiet, empty, the kind of place that didn't feel promising, which is exactly why they went. They walked through the fields slowly, scanning the ground. At first, all they saw were piles of trash. Black garbage bags scattered near the edge of the property, bags like the kind people dumped all the time. Stephen kicked one absent-mindedly. It shifted but didn't crumple the way it should have. Something inside was solid. The officer knelt down and cut into the bag. That's when everything stopped. Inside was a human body, folded tightly, frozen in place. Stephen stood there, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, his mind pushing back against the possibility he already understood. He kept opening the bags, one inside another, until there was no room left for doubt. It was Lisa. Her body had been wrapped in 5 layers of plastic trash bags, placed carefully one inside the next. She was nude. She had been there for days, exposed to the elements, her body locked in place by the cold. But on her left hand, one detail remained unchanged. Her wedding ring was still there. Stephen stayed with her while help was called in, alone in the field with the person everyone had been searching for, the person they believed might still be alive somewhere. The emotional weight of that moment was overwhelming. Fear, grief, shock, a sudden collapse of hope. When word spread, Lisa's family was shattered. Her mother refused to believe it at first, repeating that it couldn't be her, that there had to be a mistake. The sound of her reaction, raw and uncontrollable, stayed with those who heard it. Matthew was brought to the scene but was kept back from the body. Witnesses later described him becoming hysterical, pushing forward, shouting. He was eventually restrained and taken to the hospital where he was sedated. By then, the case had crossed a line it could never return from. The medical examiner would later determine that Lisa died by strangulation. No accident, no medical emergency, no disappearance gone wrong. This was a homicide. The discovery didn't bring answers. It stripped away illusions. What had begun as a search for a missing newlywed was now an investigation into who could do this and why. Because finding Lisa didn't answer the question. It changed it. Once Lisa Solomon's body was found, the language around her disappearance changed immediately, and so did the focus. This was no longer about locating a missing woman or following tips that might lead her home. The medical examiner confirmed what the scene already suggested. Lisa had been strangled. There would be no recovery, no reunion, no chance that she had wandered off and survived. The investigation entered a different phase. Detectives closed the door on several possibilities that had dominated the early days. Rob, the man from the bank who had shown interest in Lisa, was formally ruled out. His whereabouts on the night of her disappearance were verified. The idea of a random outsider faded quickly. With each external option removed, attention began drifting inward. Quietly at first, rumors began circulating through the community. Not accusations, but questions. People replayed what they had seen and heard in the days before Lisa was found. Conversations that once centered on sympathy started to sound different. The same moments were being examined from a new angle. Matthew's behavior came back into focus. His constant presence, his need to speak for Lisa, his ability to move seamlessly between emotion and command. Things that had once looked like devotion under pressure now felt heavier when viewed alongside the reality of how Lisa died. Those closest to her began to reflect too. Lisa's uncle, Howard, spoke openly about his discomfort with Matthew, feelings he'd had long before the wedding. He remembered moments that didn't sit right, patterns that seemed small at the time but grew louder in hindsight. Matthew, in Howard's view, always needed acknowledgement. He wanted his efforts noticed, his role affirmed, his presence felt. It wasn't aggression, It wasn't overt cruelty. It was something subtler, a constant pull toward the center, a need to be essential in every space Lisa occupied. To some, that looked like care. To others, it felt suffocating. Family members revisited conversations they'd once brushed off. Friends remembered how rarely Matthew gave Lisa room to breathe. None of it had raised alarms before. After all, he was attentive. He was involved. He showed up. But now those same traits were being reinterpreted under the weight of a confirmed homicide. Police understood something the public often struggles with. When a woman is killed, the person closest to her must be examined carefully. Not because guilt is assumed, but because proximity matters. Matthew had been the last known person to see Lisa alive. His account defined the timeline. His version of events framed everything that followed. And while nothing had been proven yet, the investigation had clearly turned. The question was no longer what happened to Lisa Solomon. It was who had been closest to her when everything went wrong, and whether the love story everyone believed in had been hiding something far more troubling all along. In the days after Lisa's disappearance, and even after her body was found, the images of Matthew Solomon on television continued to circulate. Viewers saw the same scenes repeatedly. A young husband speaking directly into the camera, voice breaking, eyes wet, asking for help. Those moments had shaped public opinion early on, and for many, they still carried weight. Grief, after all, has no single shape. But as investigators shifted their focus, those televised appearances were no longer viewed in isolation. They were replayed alongside timelines, witness accounts, and details that had been overlooked when hope was still alive. The emotional displays didn't disappear. They were re-examined. Some things stood out. Matthew's appeals were intense, but also precise. He spoke clearly. He stayed on message. He returned to the spotlight again and again, even when police had begun narrowing the direction of the case. His expressions of distress often arrived at moments when attention was highest, then faded quickly when decisions needed to be made. Off camera, he was composed. He coordinated. He spoke with certainty. He answered questions without hesitation. The shift between those two states, visible anguish and measured control, unsettled people who had been close to the search. Publicly, sympathy remained strong. Neighbors defended him. Strangers insisted there was no right way to grieve, and they were correct. Tears alone proved nothing. But privately, doubts were growing. Investigators didn't accuse Matthew on television. They didn't confront him publicly. They did something quieter and far more telling. They watched. They listened. They compared what he said to what could be verified. They looked at when emotion surfaced and when it didn't. The same moments that once convinced viewers now raised questions. Why did his certainty never waver? Why did his story remain so firm while others struggled to make sense of the loss? Why did he seem most expressive when an audience was present? None of this meant the tears were fake. People close to the case would later say that wasn't the point. The point was timing. Because grief usually fractures people. It disorients them, strips away confidence, leaves them unsure of what to do next. What investigators observed instead was a man who moved fluidly between sorrow and command, depending on the setting. And once that contrast was noticed, it became impossible to unsee. The tears were real. The timing was not. And with that realization, the story of a devoted husband began to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions, leaving one question hanging in the air that no one could ignore much longer. Stories like Lisa Solomon's linger because they force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The greatest danger doesn't always arrive as a stranger. More often, it comes wrapped in familiarity, in routine, in trust, in the person everyone assumes is safest. Lisa wasn't living recklessly. She wasn't isolated. She was newly married, close to her family, surrounded by people who believed she was protected. That belief shaped how her disappearance was understood in the earliest days. It shaped who was questioned and who wasn't. When harm comes from someone nearby, communities struggle to accept it. Familiar faces feel reassuring. Public grief feels convincing. And when a person shows emotion in front of cameras, we instinctively read it as sincerity. We want the story to make sense, and the version that hurts least is often the one we cling to longest. But devotion can be misleading when it leaves no room for distance. Intensity can feel flattering when it's framed as care. Attention can look like protection when no one is taught to question it. These dynamics don't announce themselves loudly. They blend in, they're praised, and by the time doubt enters the picture, it often feels disloyal to voice it. Public narratives matter because they guide where attention goes and where it doesn't. When a single version of events dominates early on, other possibilities are delayed. Time is lost. Questions go unasked. In cases like this, that delay can be devastating. Lisa deserves to be remembered as more than the way she was found. She was a daughter who worried about her father, a young woman excited about her wedding, someone who trusted the life she was building. Her story matters not because of how it ended, but because of what it reveals about how easily warning signs can be mistaken for affection. This case asks us to look closer, not just at outcomes, but at patterns we excuse along the way. It challenges the idea that grief always looks the same, and that love is proven by proximity alone. Because when familiarity shields the truth, silence becomes its strongest ally. And Lisa's story reminds us why paying attention, even when it feels uncomfortable, is sometimes the only way the truth ever comes to light. Lisa Solomon should have been planning years, not leaving behind questions. She should have been building routines, arguing over paint colors, talking about the future in the casual way people do when they believe time is guaranteed. Instead, her life was reduced to an ending she never chose, one that froze her in a single moment while the world moved on without her. What was taken wasn't just her breath, it was everything that was supposed to come next. Birthdays uncelebrated, holidays that would never feel whole again. A family that now measures time by before and after. For Lisa's mother, the silence left behind by her daughter never softened. For those who loved her, the ache didn't fade. It settled in. And then there's the damage left by appearances. This case reminds us how easily certainty can be borrowed from emotion, how quickly tears can persuade, how comfortingly simple it feels to accept the story placed in front of us, especially when that story is delivered by someone we expect to trust. But belief, once given too freely, can blur judgment and delay hard questions. Lisa's story didn't begin with fear. It didn't begin with chaos. It began with love, promises, and a future that looked secure from the outside. That's what makes it so unsettling, because when danger hides behind familiarity, it rarely announces itself. It relies on assumption, on hesitation, on our reluctance to doubt what looks normal. There is no way to give Lisa back what was taken. There is no ending that restores balance. But there is responsibility to remember her as more than a headline and to stay present with stories like hers long after the cameras turn away. Because attention matters. It keeps names from fading. It keeps questions alive. And sometimes it's the only thing standing between truth and silence. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles and share it, because attention keeps victims from being forgotten. And tell me, what moment changed how you saw this case?